today we want to talk about darts, and this is very scary for a lot of you, and it was very scary for me when I started sewing and I saw a pattern with a dart. I was like, no, I use another one. So it was always kind of this no-go zone. So I try to avoid it where best I can, and I don't know why I was scared, but now I really love them. So I really like darts because they contour around the body in a really perfect way. Because if you take a piece of a fabric, just like this, and you try to contour it around a shape, is it the back side of your, like behind, or, the front, breast area, like what do you do if you want to really contour it very nicely? You always gather extra fabric somewhere. Or if you start at the bottom, you come up here and then you have extra fabric around here to make it really nicely contoured. And that's where darts come in. And darts are the perfect fold. Like, let's say we have some fabric around here in the bust area, and then, we want to contour it nicely around that shape. Then this extra fabric that we have accumulated here, this will basically be a dart. So this is a dart. Or at the other end, if we go further down, like let's say we do it like that, we gather material down here. This can be a dart. It can also be gathered on the side here. Then it's a side dart. It can be gathered a little further up here from the armhole towards the high point. Then this would be considered an armhole dart. So we have all those, like either from the shoulder dart, the waist dart, the side dart, or the armhole dart. So there are many possibilities. And, they all have the same thing. They have a dart point. That is when the dart gets really narrow. That dart point we call apex. Then they have like two lines where the dart folds. These are the dart legs. So they all have that in common, and if they have one point and two dart legs, then we call this a single point dart or a one point dart. Sometimes we have darts with 2 points where we have a pointy end, like let's say down here. We have a pointy end here, so it gathers more and more material here, and then towards the waist it gets a little less, and we have another point at the bottom. Then we have a two-pointed dart. So this is mostly done for dresses or like coats, jackets that are very tailored. So there are endless possibilities, and I'll show you a few here on the mannequin, like a very classic, like one point or single point dart would be that one. Try to get that on really quick. It's a cropped, like a jean kind of material. That means it is a woven material, not stretchy at all. And that's why we need contouring, we need an opening, we need a darts, some place. And as you can see here, oops, yeah, it's okay. So it has a dart here, and it's inside out so that you can see better. I just put it on the inside out way. So if you lift that sleeve aside, then you can see this is the side dart here because it's from the side seam towards the high point. And also what you can see that the dart is not necessarily ending at the high point. This would create sometimes more like this 80s Madonna pointy bra kind of look. And nowadays we want to avoid that. Unless you really go for that look, then you do the dart all the way to the high point. If you want to avoid it, just stay away from it. And it can be for an inch, even 2 inches like this here, because it is a loose fitting top. it is totally fine to have it only like, like maybe almost 2 inches apart, away from our high point. So that would be a single point dart. So that's a very simple example on a single point on a top. Then what you know or what you've done probably before is a single point dart or on a skirt or on a pair of pants. So another example for a single pointed dart is another jacket I am working on right now. And I did that with just draping, nothing else. So I have shoulder darts on this one. So as you can see, so this dart here starts here at the shoulder and it goes down to my high point. So that is another possibility for a dart. It's not going all the way to the high point. So that's the whole idea of it. So you are, this is the high point and that's where my dart ends, my apex is. So it's not all the way to the high point. So it kind of faces towards the high point, but it's not really up to there. And with this thick material, which is a fleece, you try to avoid gathering the material and then moving it to one side and iron it down. So with those thick materials, you really want to have it centered and you want to cut all that extra material. And then you press it down centered. So part of the extra material is on this side and part of the extra material will be on the other side. So that's how you do a very volume heavy fabric. So one more thing to mention about darts before we go in and really do those is why a dart always looks so weird when you have it on a pattern sheet. So I just drew a very simple, like a front skirt pattern sheet, and it looks very familiar, I guess, So this is the center front, and that's the outside or the side seam. Then we have this dart, and I exaggerated, made a big dart there. I exaggerated that, but in principle, very often patterns do look like that. And what's hard to understand for a beginner is why we have this little roof here or this little extra triangle here or this little tent on top. So what is this and why do we need it? Wouldn't it just be easier if we just had a straight line across, like something like this? So that's more logic. But once you've made darts and you've sewn with darts, you know that this is the most important part of the dart, I would almost say. So at first, what we do with the dart, we have our apex, that's the point down there where it ends. Then we have the 2 dart legs on either side, and then I also have the dotted line in the center. So how we fold a dart and manage to do it is that we fold it on that dotted line. So we just fold it in half like that. And what you do next is to sew from the outside towards the apex point. So you sew that down and then you iron it to one side, and that is for a skirt, it's always to the outside. So don't iron it facing it to the inside, to the center, because we don't want to have any extra material around the belly area. We want that extra material more sideways. So we've sewn that, we have ironed it towards the side, towards the side seam, like that. Oops. So you iron it towards the side, and then this is basically the result of what you have on your dart then. So it bumps out the whole paper. kind of sideways, you know, it bumps it out a little bit. I don't know if you can see it really well. And of course it will be more round and fluid depending on the drape of your fabric. But this is basically now you created a three-dimensional shape just by adding that dart. Before it was a flat sheet of paper, and all of a sudden we have a three-dimensional shape. When we now look on the inside of our dart paper, we can see that that dart really or the extra material that we have here really finishes up with our rest of the pattern. So there is no part missing or nothing really sticking out, or, you know, it's really in line with the rest of the fabric. And that is important if you want to add a waistband. You know, you want to grab that material too. You don't want to have that lower or, you know, like shorter than the rest of it, because you want to grab that and have that held by a waistband. That's why this needs to be in line with the rest. So, and if you unfold it, you see, oh my God, there is all this extra material. But once you fold it, that extra material really blends in with the rest of my fabric. So that is really important. Now let's do it the other way around, as if we just had a straight line over there. Meaning I just cut this off. So this is kind of the first impression most people have. Yeah, that's good enough, you know, like this is my dart. So first step, you fold it where the dotted line is. Then you iron it to the outside or facing the side seam. Same as we did before. So you create that three-dimensional shape. It's all the same thing, you know, like this is the three-dimensional shape. This is my dart, but when you look at the inside now, and I hope you can see that really well, you can see that there is part of the fabric missing. So there is a lack of fabric here where that fold is. And let's say you sew a waistband on top of this, it would not grab this material, and then later on this dart material would just be all over the place and flip left and right and whatnot. So it's not held in place correctly. So, and that's why we need this extra little triangle here that looks so odd when we have it on our pattern piece. So that said, I don't want to bore you any longer. So that said, I want to show you exactly how you measure those dart points, the dart legs, and what to do, how you sew it, how you finish it. And I have prepared like 3 different samples, and I just want you to follow me along. Okay, let's go. So basically there are 3 different kinds of darts, and I want to show all 3 of them and what's the typical scenario of each of them, and then also show an example for each of the 3 main darts. So the first one is the single point dart that we see very often in skirts or pants. You know, they are usually on or around the waist and face downwards in a way, and they contour kind of the belly area and the back area. So a single point dart is mainly, and I will just make a little dart here on my piece of muslin. So let's say we use this area here as the top of our garment, and from there we have the dart. So the dart is usually defined by several different things, one of which is the dart width. So let's say our single point dart is 2 inches wide and 8 inches long. So I mark here 2 inches wide and then 8 inches long. So I'll go here. First of all, I take the center of the 2 here, and then from the center I go down 8 inches. And that is down to this point here. And that point down there we call the apex. And the apex is our dart point. So this is where the dart will end. And it is very important to have that apex right below the center of our dart width here. And then we connect our apex with our end of dart points here. And what you can do, it's not really necessary so much, but just for the sake of it, I will give this dotted line just for later when I'm sewing and ironing. So what we also have here, so these are the dart legs. So I'll just write that down. So we have the dart legs, these are those 2 here, the end points, and then the apex. Very often when we deal with darts, we also use our awl. And the awl is a very pointy, sharp tool that you can poke through pattern paper and fabrics. And when you, for example, have a paper pattern on a fabric, it's kind of tricky to mark that apex point with, you know, like your chalk or anything else. So what do? You usually mark them with your awl. And the problem is that marking it with an awl means you're poking through the fabric. And if that is right on your apex, then you have a little hole there. So we don't want that to happen. So that's why if we mark our apex with the awl, we are always marking it 1/2 inch in. Like 1/2 inch away from the actual point is our apex. So if you mark it with the ruler, I mean, I do it like freehand basically, along that center line, 1/2 inch up from there is our apex point. And that's what I mark with my awl. So I create a hole in there. Later on, when we sew this dart, you know, the seam will cover it up, so there is no hole to see. And like every professional seamstress knows that when they sew a dart, they see the hole and they know I have to go another 1/2 inch further. So it's always another 1/2 inch beyond that point. Nobody will end sewing at that point. So it is industry knowledge. So you always go 1/2 inch beyond. So let's just write the details. So this is 2 inch wide and 8 inch long. I'll just write it down for my own sake. So this is the single point dart that is the most simple one and the most often used one. So then the next one is a dart when you have a very thick fabric. So we just give the same measurements, and it is basically the same procedure. So we do 2 inches wide, so that's the center point, and we go 8 inches down from the center point. From here, 8 inches. So I'll do a dotted line. And then we connect the apex point with our dart end point. And so far it looks exactly the same. And I will show you when I'm on my sewing machine then and finishing up that that dart, then I will show you the difference. So again, we have the apex point here. I will mark it with my awl. So I poke a hole in there. Perfect. And then the third dart is a double pointed dart. And it looks a little different because, as I said, it's a double point. So it goes out, you know, on both sides basically. And let's say we do one that is 2 inches wide and 6 inches long. Or also let's do 8. So then they are all the same. So we do it 8 inches long. And since it's the middle, so it's from this dart point to that dart point. And the center is at 4. And we said 2 inches wide. So I go 1 inch on each side. So it's to here and to there. So now I have those 4 points and I will connect them. A little rough around my kitchen table here. But it's okay. So those darts with a double point are used mostly when you have longer tops or dresses, and these are around the waist area so that it gets a little narrower on the waist and then a little wider underneath the waist. So let's put the dart points again with the awl, like 1/2 inch from each end here and 1/2 inch from this end. So I have the 2 of those now. And I also have 8 inches length and 2 inches wide. Okay, so now we will go over to the sewing machine and I will show you how to sew a dart. When you sew like the double pointed one, you don't really sew to the point and then switch over to the other point. You kind of make a little curve here, kind of taking away that outermost edge. So you round that a little bit because we don't want any edges. So that's the only adjustments here. And then I will go over to the sewing machine and we'll stitch them together. Our single pointed dart is the first one that we have here on our muslin. So we will sew that together now. And at first we have to align them right and then we do the sewing. And the alignment would be that we fold the dart right in the center where I have that dotted line. Fold it perfectly in the middle here. Okay, all the way to the end. And then that would align my 2 marked black lines perfectly on top of each other. So that is the goal, to have those 2 dart legs perfectly matching. So, and when we have this achieved, we can pin it together. I don't overpin, as you know, but what I do is that I will put in a pin at the apex just to give me a warning sign that it is really here that the dart has to end. So as you can see, I have those 2 pins lengthwise along the seam, and then this is perpendicular in a 90-degree angle towards our seam. So it's a warning, you know, like it just tells me that this is where the dart really has the apex. Okay, now I will stitch those together. Usually you stitch them in the same color as your fabric, so it's not so visible, but I chose black thread, so it's a little easier to see. So now I come towards an end, and I'm not just continuing in a straight line towards that point here. I come down and then I rearrange my fabric slightly so that the last few stitches are parallel to that corner here. So I'm not going all the way to that end, because what we don't want to have in a dart is that they are pointy and then the garment is kind of looks like a tent, or like Madonna in the 80s, you know, the Madonna bra kind of thing in the 80s. So we don't want that. So that's why I parallel my seam for the last 2-3 seams here. 2-3 stitches. So I take it out without backing up at the end. So what I want to do now at the end, and that's really like a very traditional classic way to do. So you are at the end here and you have both of your threads, and then you knot them together without having the backing up to do, which would add bulk and extra stitches in that area, and we don't want that. So we just put 2 or 3 knots here. 1, 2, 3. And then I cut it short. And you can leave, you know, like a 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 of an inch of the thread. It doesn't really matter. And then we cut the top here. And this is basically our first dart. So when we look at it from the inside now, it's a very long dart, you know. So you can see that the end of it is more like rounded here, and it would go over a rounded area way better than if we would have stitched it all the way to the end and then we had this pointy, you know, like really pointy thing sticking out. So we don't want that. So the next step is to iron that dart, and I will just iron it to one side. There is a general rule, like if you have a dart at like a skirt or a pant, you always iron it to the outside, towards your side seam. Don't iron it towards the center, because we don't want any more fabric and a triple layer of fabric towards the center of it. So, and I will do that right here. So here is my dart that I just finished. And you would just pull it apart a little bit and then move the material over to one side and iron it down. So another trick that I know from way back then is or another, like a challenge that sometimes you have when you have very thin fabric and you iron that down, then you turn it over, then you see, or like where the dart is, it's kind of this little wave here, or a step, because your dart material is too thick. So you can avoid that. So I put a piece of paper underneath here, and then I iron my dart down. Okay, and by doing that, you remove the paper, and then you cannot see anything from the front. So it does not kind of give that impression or this embossed feeling here that there is a dart underneath. So this is what we will do with our second dart, the dart for thicker fabrics. I will sew it the exact same way, and then the finish up will be a little different. So here is my second dart that I did exactly like the first one, but we just imagine that we have now a very thick material, and we don't want to have like 3 layers of a very thick material on our, you know, like skirt or pants or jacket or whatever you do. So this one, as I said, we will pretend to be very thick, and what I will do, I will cut away that extra material here that kind of bulges out, and I will cut it in a way that I just leave maybe 1/4 of an inch of material on next to my dart seam. Cut it all the way to the as far as I have my 1/4 of an inch. So I cut away that extra, as you can see, and then I iron it apart from each other. So that will be just pressing that apart, and then press the seam down as I go. So it's all the way pressed apart up to the seam, the apex. So in that way, you know, you don't add bulge to our material here. Here you can see now it's a very thin area where it's just plain flat and not just a big dart area like moved over to one side. So this is what you do with a very thick fabric. And now the last one, the double pointed one, I will just fold in the center here. The same what I did with the others, but now I have 2 apex points. I will center it, give it a press. And then I will stitch from one apex point all the way to the other one. So here we have our last, like the double pointed dart, and I stitched it the same way as I would stitch the other 2. So if the first 2-3 stitches are straight, then I go and do the diagonal line here. I round off that corner a little bit, so it's not one point, one edge. And then the same at the end, I do 2 straight stitches, and then I knot both of those ends. So some books refer also that you start here in the center and you sew towards the apex, and then you start at the center again and continue to this apex. I happen to not realize any difference if you do a one seam or like two seams from the center on outwards. So it's really up to you. I mean, you can try it, and some people really are very strong-minded about doing it the right way, like from the center to the apex. So then it's time for the ironing of this kind of dart, which is a little more weird or tricky, and because of that we want to just cut in our dart here a few times, and I cut out kind of little triangles so that it can lay better, and I cut it all the way maybe up to a quarter of an or an eighth of an inch towards the seam. So not all the way to the seam. So now it's a little easier to fold that over to one side and iron it down. And same thing, if you have a very, very fine material, put the paper underneath, you can do that. If you have a very, very thick material, you cut the extra material and center it. Okay, so I have it flat towards one side, and when you look at it from the front, so this is how it would look, and it doesn't really do justice now to see a flat piece here with that dart in the middle, but I will hold it up to our mannequin and then you can see why we are doing this and what we're doing here. Okay, but that's pretty much it, and thank you for watching.